Imagine a continent, vast and ancient, nearly the same size as the contiguous United States. Now picture it with a population smaller than that of just 2 American states combined. This is the staggering reality of Australia, a place where an astonishing 95% of its land is considered uninhabited. This isn't recent. It's etched into the geography and climate of the continent. From the air, the emptiness is breathtaking. Endless horizons of red earth stretch out, interrupted only by rugged mountain ranges. Shimmering salt pans, the silent interior stands in stark contrast to the vibrant life clinging to its edges. This extreme imbalance gives Australia one of the lowest population densities on the planet, with only about 3.5 people for every square kilometer. To put this into perspective, consider Java. Java is 60 times smaller than Australia, yet it is home to 6 times Australia's population. The reasons are written in the land itself. Limited rainfall, scorching heat, soil so poor it struggles to support agriculture. These factors create an environment that is profoundly inhospitable. The story of Australia is a tale of 2 nations within one. One is highly urbanized. About 89% live in a handful of major cities. In fact, 85% of Australians live within just 50 kilometers of the coastline. These coastal corridors are ribbons of civilization, suburbs, traffic, and skyscrapers. The other Australia is the vast, quiet interior, a world away from the urban hustle. It's a land of immense distances, profound isolation, and a deep, abiding connection to ancient rhythms that have governed the continent for millennia. The contrast is not just geographical, it is cultural, economic, and deeply psychological. This demographic anomaly raises a critical question: why, in an age of advanced technology and a growing global population, does so much of this developed nation remain so profoundly empty? And for those living elsewhere, why should I care now? The answer lies in the lessons Australia offers about the absolute limits of human settlement and the immense challenges of adapting to a warming planet. Challenges that are no longer confined to one corner of the globe. The people most directly affected by this geographical paradox are, of course, the Australians themselves. City dwellers in Sydney, city dwellers in Melbourne, city dwellers in Brisbane, Indigenous communities whose ancestors thrived here for over 65,000 years, farmers battling drought and unpredictable weather, pastoralists working the Outback, miners extracting wealth from the arid ground. Each group faces unique challenges and opportunities. The risks of this lopsided settlement pattern are becoming increasingly severe. As global temperatures rise, the already harsh interior is getting hotter and drier. Australia's climate has warmed by 1.51 degrees Celsius since 1910. That warming has dramatically increased the frequency of extreme heat events. Some scientific models now suggest large parts of northern Australia could become virtually uninhabitable. That could force even greater concentration into coastal cities, amplifying pressure on water, housing, and essential services. The delicate balance on the continent's fringe faces a critical test. The repercussions extend beyond simple overcrowding. Droughts, floods, bushfires. In the southwest, rainfall during the crucial growing season has decreased by around 16% since 1970, placing immense strain on agriculture. Coastal concentration makes the nation vulnerable to sea level rise and extreme coastal weather. The Great Australian Emptiness is a core factor in the nation's escalating vulnerability to the climate crisis. Yet amid these mounting challenges, there is a glimmer of hope. The emptiness also presents an extraordinary opportunity. Australia's vast, sun-drenched interior is ideal for generating renewable energy on a massive scale. The nation has set an ambitious target to generate 82% of its electricity from renewable sources by the year 2030. This transition is already well underway. Australia boasts the highest uptake of rooftop solar in the world, with nearly 4 million systems installed on homes and businesses across the country. 1 in 3 households now generates its own clean power, turning a climatic challenge into a source of energy independence and innovation. To understand the Australia of today, we must first journey deep into its past, long before the first European sails appeared on the horizon. The story of human settlement begins at least 65,000 years ago, with the arrival of the ancestors of modern Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. They were the world's first true maritime explorers, undertaking epic sea voyages from Southeast Asia across submerged land bridges and open water. They did not arrive on a vacant land but on a continent teeming with unique life, giant marsupials, and dramatic climatic shifts. Their arrival marked the beginning of one of the longest continuous cultures on Earth, a story of resilience and adaptation. These first peoples did not simply survive, they thrived. Over tens of thousands of years, they spread across every corner of the landmass: the lush tropical north, the frigid highlands of Tasmania, and the arid heart of the continent. This was not random dispersal, but a sophisticated process of exploration, settlement, and deep learning. They developed an unparalleled understanding of the land's rhythms, its subtle signs, and its life-giving resources. Their population grew, and they established intricate social networks, trade routes, and belief systems tied to place. They were the original inhabitants of the entire continent. By 1788, it's estimated 750,000 to 1,000 Indigenous people lived across Australia, organized into over 500 distinct nations with their own languages and territories. Unlike static European settlements, early Australian peopling was mobile and deeply knowledgeable about the environment. Success in arid zones was built on seasonal movement, following rains, flowering plants, and animal cycles, ensuring resources weren't overexploited. This nomadic lifestyle was an effective strategy for extremes. Settlements were dynamic connections to country, a living map in memory and story. They transformed the landscape through fire stick farming, creating mosaic vegetation, boosting biodiversity, and lowering catastrophic fire risk. They engineered aquaculture systems and established permanent villages in resource-rich areas. They had shaped a human-managed, productive, and sustainable landscape. Their presence proves the interior was not empty, but a homeland rich in culture, resources, and history. The ability of Aboriginal peoples to flourish in the harsh interior was not accidental. It was the result of millennia of accumulated knowledge, passed down through generations. This was a science of the land, as precise and detailed as any modern discipline. They possessed an encyclopedic understanding of botany, food, medicine, materials for tools. They knew how to process toxic seeds to make them edible and where to dig for water-holding roots in the desiccated earth. This knowledge allowed them to unlock the hidden abundance of a landscape that to an outsider's eye would appear barren and hostile. Their social structures were also perfectly adapted to the demands of the environment. Kinship systems created vast networks of reciprocity and obligation, ensuring that individuals and groups could rely on one another in times of scarcity. These networks facilitated trade over immense distances: ochre, tools, shells. This social fabric was the invisible infrastructure that made life in the arid zones possible, providing a safety net that was far more resilient than any physical wall or permanent storehouse. It ensured that knowledge, resources, and support flowed freely across the seemingly empty plains, connecting communities in a web of mutual dependence and shared culture. Water, the most precious and elusive resource in Central Australia, was the central organizing principle of life. The first people's maps of the land were, above all, maps of water. They knew the location of every permanent spring, rock hole, soak. They could read the subtle clues in the landscape, the type of vegetation, the behavior of animals that indicated the presence of underground water. Their entire cosmology was woven around the stories of the creation of these water sources by ancestral beings during the dream time. This spiritual connection reinforced the practical knowledge needed to survive, embedding the life or death locations of water into the deepest layers of their culture and identity. This deep, holistic understanding stands in stark contrast to the European approach that would follow. For Indigenous Australians, the land was not a commodity to be owned or a wilderness to be tamed. It was a sentient, living entity, a relative, a provider, and a spiritual home. Every rock formation, waterhole, and tree had a story and a place within a complex system of meaning. This worldview fostered a relationship of stewardship and respect, rather than one of extraction and control. It explains why they were able to live successfully across the entire continent for 65,000 years, while later arrivals would find themselves confined to its very edges, baffled by the vastness they called empty. In 1788, the arrival of the First Fleet in what is now Sydney marked a cataclysmic turning point in the continent's history. The British came not as adapters, but as conquerors, bringing with them a completely different concept of land, law, life. Their model of settlement was based on the European ideal of agriculture: fixed plots of land, fenced and plowed, domesticated crops, livestock. This model was entirely dependent on consistent rainfall and fertile soil, resources they found only in the narrow coastal plains and the temperate southeastern corner of the continent. Their initial attempts to push inland were repeatedly thwarted by a climate and landscape that refused to conform. The newcomers saw the interior not as a sophisticated, human-managed landscape, but as a wilderness, empty, hostile, and unproductive. The Latin term terra nullius, meaning land belonging to no one, was used to legally justify their seizure of the continent, a concept that willfully ignored the complex societies and land management systems of the indigenous inhabitants. For the British, the land's value was measured solely by its potential for farming and grazing. The arid interior could not support sheep, cattle, wheat, and was therefore deemed worthless. This foundational misunderstanding would dictate Australian settlement patterns for the next 2 centuries, creating the coastal bias that defines the nation today. The initial colonial settlements were coastal ports: Sydney, Hobart, Melbourne, Adelaide. This was a strategic necessity. They were the lifelines back to Britain, the entry points for new colonists, supplies, and capital, and the exit points for the wool, whale oil, and minerals that were the colony's economic reason for being. The entire logic of the colonial enterprise was outward-looking, focused on extracting resources and shipping them back to the imperial center. The interior was merely a hinterland to be exploited where possible, but the true heart of the new society was, and would remain, firmly planted on the coast, looking out towards the sea. As the colonies expanded, they did so by hugging the coast or following the inland river systems as far as they were navigable. Railways and telegraph lines were built to connect the productive agricultural zones and mining discoveries to the coastal ports, reinforcing this pattern. The interior was something to be crossed, not settled. Explorers who ventured into the dead heart returned with tales of hardship, thirst, and death, cementing its reputation as a place to be avoided. A national psychology developed that saw the coast as the place of civilization, safety, and progress, while the inland was a place of exile, struggle, and failure. This colonial mindset laid the foundations for the 95% mystery we see today. The primary reason for Australia's vast emptiness is written not in its history books, but in its skies. The continent is, by a significant margin, the driest inhabited continent on Earth. Its position on the globe places much of its landmass under the subtropical high-pressure belt, a zone of descending dry air that suppresses cloud formation and rainfall. This atmospheric feature is the engine of the world's great deserts, and in Australia, it dictates the climate for a huge portion of the interior. This isn't just a matter of low average rainfall. It's a fundamental atmospheric condition that starves the land of the moisture needed to support dense vegetation, large-scale agriculture, and consequently, large human populations. This dryness is compounded by extreme heat. The sheer size of the continent and the lack of significant inland water bodies mean that the interior heats up relentlessly. For much of the year, vast swathes of central and western Australia experience temperatures that are inhospitable to both people and conventional European crops. Daytime temperatures frequently soar above 40 degrees Celsius, and in some regions they can exceed 50 degrees Celsius. This is not just uncomfortable, it is dangerous. This extreme heat places immense stress on the human body, evaporates what little surface water exists, and makes outdoor labor nearly impossible during the hottest parts of the day. These two factors, low rainfall and high heat, combine to create the dominant feature of the Australian landscape, desert. Approximately 70% of the continent is classified as arid or semi-arid land. This isn't a single, uniform desert, but a mosaic of different desert environments. Simpson Desert, the iconic red sand dunes. Sturt's Stony Desert, the stony Gibber Plains. Nullarbor Plain, the vast, flat expanse. These are some of the most challenging terrestrial environments on the planet. They are landscapes defined by what they lack: water, fertile soil, and the capacity to support life in the abundance found on other continents. The implications of this climatic reality are profound. It means that the European model of settlement, based on farming and permanent towns, was simply not viable across most of the continent. The dream of turning the interior into a verdant agricultural heartland repeatedly shattered against the harsh reality of the climate. The land could not be tamed or transformed in the way that parts of North America or Europe had been. Instead, the climate imposed its own strict rules on where people could live, pushing them to the very edges of the continent where conditions were more forgiving and life-sustaining rain was more reliable. The distribution of Australia's population is not just a story of heat and dryness, but also one of mountains and rain. Running for over 3,500 kilometers along the eastern coast is a formidable mountain chain known as the Great Dividing Range. While not as high or dramatic as the Rockies or the Alps, this range has a decisive impact on the continent's climate. It acts as a massive barrier to the moisture-laden winds that blow westward from the Pacific Ocean. As this moist air is forced to rise over the mountains, it cools, condenses, and releases its water as rain, generously watering the eastern coastal strip where most Australians live. Once the air passes over the crest of the Great Dividing Range and descends into the interior, it becomes significantly drier and warmer. This phenomenon, known as a rain shadow, is the key to understanding the stark contrast between the lush, green coast and the arid land just a few hundred kilometers inland. The mountains effectively hoard the rain for the coastal side, leaving very little for the vast plains that stretch out to the west. This is why you can drive from the temperate rainforest near Sydney and, within a few hours, find yourself in a landscape of sparse, dry bushland. The mountains create a sharp, climatic dividing line that has profoundly shaped settlement. This rain shadow effect defines the limits of reliable agriculture. The well-watered eastern coastal plain and the slopes of the Great Dividing Range are where Australia's most productive farming land is found, supporting sugarcane in the north, dairy and horticulture in the south. But as you move west into the rain shadow, rainfall becomes not only lower but also far more erratic and unreliable. This makes cropping a high-risk gamble and limits land use primarily to the grazing of hardy cattle and sheep on vast properties that require enormous areas to support a small number of animals. This geographical feature essentially drew a line on the map, beyond which dense settlement was unsustainable. In the southwest corner of the continent, a similar, albeit smaller-scale effect occurs. The Darling Scarp, a low coastal range near Perth, captures moisture from the Indian Ocean, creating a pocket of Mediterranean climate that supports the city and a productive agricultural belt. But again, venture inland, and the rainfall quickly diminishes, giving way to the arid lands of the interior. These topographical features on the eastern margins and western margins act like giant funnels, concentrating the life-giving rain into narrow coastal zones. This has locked the population into these corridors, leaving the vast majority of the continent in a permanent state of water scarcity. Section 3. A land of droughts and flooding rains. The Australian climate is defined by more than just low average rainfall. It is also characterized by extreme variability. The poet Dorothea Mackellar famously described her country as a land of droughts and flooding rains. This boom and bust water cycle is a fundamental challenge to life in the interior. Long, punishing droughts, sometimes lasting for years or even a decade, are a recurring feature of the climate. During these periods, rivers dry up, vegetation withers, the land turns to dust. These are not rare events, but an expected, if brutal, part of the continent's natural rhythm. That makes long-term planning for water supply and agriculture incredibly difficult. The flip side of this aridity is the potential for cataclysmic floods. When the rains do return, they often come as intense deluges, associated with tropical cyclones in the north, or from the breakdown of large-scale weather patterns. The dry, compacted earth cannot absorb the sudden downpour, leading to massive, widespread flooding. Rivers that were sandy beds for years can transform into raging torrents. Vast inland seas can appear overnight in Central Australia's flat landscapes, cutting roads and isolating communities for weeks or months. This volatility makes building and maintaining permanent infrastructure like roads, railways, towns a costly and perilous endeavor. This extreme variability is driven by large-scale climate patterns in the surrounding oceans, most notably ENSO. During an El Niño phase, weather patterns shift, typically bringing hotter conditions, drier conditions, and widespread drought to eastern Australia. Conversely, a La Niña phase often brings cooler, much wetter conditions, increasing the risk of major floods. The oscillation creates a continent that lurches between extremes, with few truly average periods. For those trying to make a living from the land, this uncertainty discourages denser settlement. Now, climate change is amplifying this inherent volatility. Scientific evidence is clear. Australia's climate has warmed by over 1.5 degrees Celsius since 1910. This warming is supercharging the water cycle, making droughts more severe and prolonged, and increasing the intensity of extreme rainfall events when they do occur. Bushfire seasons are becoming longer and more dangerous, as seen in the catastrophic Black Summer of 2019 to 2020. This escalating climatic instability poses a grave risk, threatening to make the already marginal lands of the interior even less habitable, and placing greater pressure on the comparatively safe but increasingly crowded coastal zones. Beyond the challenges of heat and water, there is a third, more fundamental constraint written into the very ground beneath Australia: the soil. Much of the Australian continent is a vast, flat, and geologically ancient plateau. Unlike continents in the Northern Hemisphere, large parts of Australia have not experienced recent volcanic activity or glaciation. These processes, which churn up new rock and create deep, nutrient-rich soils, have largely bypassed the Australian landmass for hundreds of millions of years. The result is a landscape dominated by some of the oldest, most weathered, and nutrient-poor soils on the entire planet. Over immense geological timescales, relentless sun and occasional rain have leached essential nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen from the topsoil, leaving behind a sterile mixture of sand and clay, rich in iron oxides that give the Outback its characteristic red color. While native vegetation has brilliantly adapted to these impoverished conditions, developing unique ways to capture and recycle scarce nutrients, these soils are profoundly unsuitable for conventional agriculture. Early colonists, accustomed to the deep, fertile loams of Europe, discovered this to their great cost. Crops failed, and livestock struggled to find enough nutrition in the sparse native grasses, limiting the carrying capacity of the land. This poor soil quality is a major barrier to settlement across vast areas. Even in regions with adequate rainfall, the soil itself may not be able to support productive farming. This explains why, even within the comparatively well-watered areas inland of the Great Dividing Range, land use is often restricted to grazing rather than intensive cropping. To make these soils productive for agriculture often requires the massive and costly application of artificial fertilizers, particularly phosphates. This economic reality means that large-scale farming is only viable in select pockets where soil quality is naturally higher, further concentrating agricultural activity and the populations that depend on it. The combination of poor soils, extreme heat, and scarce water creates a powerful and unforgiving environmental trinity. Poor soils, extreme heat, scarce water. Each factor reinforces the others, creating an inhospitable feedback loop that has rendered 95% of the continent largely uninhabitable for dense human settlement. It is not one single factor, but the relentless combination of all three that has defined Australia's demographic destiny. The continent is not empty by choice or by historical accident. It is empty because the fundamental building blocks for large-scale, sedentary human societies, reliable water, temperate climate, and fertile earth, are, across most of its expanse, profoundly and unalterably absent. Water is the lifeblood of any civilization, and in Australia, its scarcity is the central defining constraint on settlement. Beyond the coastal fringe, where rainfall is more reliable, the continent holds very little permanent surface water. The river systems of the interior are ephemeral, flowing only after rare, heavy rains, terminating in vast, saline salt lakes, or vanishing into thirsty desert sands. The largest river system, the Murray-Darling Basin, drains much of the southeast and is already heavily exploited and over-allocated. It is the hard-working heart of Australia's food bowl, but it is under immense stress from agriculture, industry, and a drying climate, making it unreliable for future urban expansion. With so little surface water, life in the dry interior has long depended on tapping what lies beneath. The Great Artesian Basin is one of the largest underground reserves in the world, spanning nearly a quarter of the continent. This deep aquifer enabled pastoralism and the survival of remote towns in inland Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia. For over a century, bores were drilled deep into the earth, letting water that fell millennia ago on the Great Dividing Range rise under pressure. Early settlers saw it as limitless, a miraculous fix to the continent's dryness. But this underground water is not a panacea. It's a finite fossil resource being depleted faster than it can replenish. Decades of uncontrolled bore flow have reduced pressure across large areas, causing many bores to stop flowing. The water is often brackish and high in minerals, suitable for livestock, but unfit for human consumption or large-scale irrigation without costly treatment. Reliance on groundwater is a fragile lifeline. It has allowed a sparse interior population, but cannot support a major city without risking exhaustion. Supplying water to a new inland city would be monumental. Building large-scale desalination plants far from the coast, or constructing pipelines hundreds of kilometers long, would be astronomically expensive. They require immense energy and ongoing maintenance, making water prohibitively costly for residents and industry. The lack of readily available, high-quality fresh water is a non-negotiable barrier. It's why Outback populating visions remain visions. Settlement has always followed the water, and the water stubbornly remains close to the coast. If water is the first great barrier to populating the interior, the second is the sheer mind-boggling scale of the continent itself. Australia is a nation defined by immense distances and profound isolation. The phrase coined by historian Geoffrey Blaney perfectly captures how this geographical reality has shaped the nation's economy, society, and psyche. To build a new city in the interior would not just be an act of construction, but a battle against this fundamental isolation. The cost of connecting such a settlement to the rest of the country and the world presents a formidable economic and logistical challenge that has consistently discouraged decentralization and reinforced the coastal settlement pattern. Consider the basic infrastructure required to sustain a modern community: roads, railways, and airports transporting goods, people, and resources. In the vastness of the Australian interior, the cost per kilometre to build and maintain this infrastructure is enormous. The harsh climate, with its extreme heat and periodic flooding, wreaks havoc on road surfaces and railway lines, requiring constant and expensive repairs. A journey that might take a few hours in Europe or North America can take days in Australia, crossing vast, unpopulated stretches. This makes the transport of fresh food, medical supplies, and consumer goods to remote locations incredibly expensive, driving up the cost of living significantly for anyone who lives there. This isolation also creates significant social and cultural challenges. Access to higher education, specialized medical care, and diverse employment opportunities is heavily concentrated in the major coastal cities. For a family living in a remote town, a medical emergency can require a flight of hundreds of kilometers with the Royal Flying Doctor Service. Children may need to leave home at a young age to attend boarding school for secondary education. While technology like the internet has helped to bridge some of these gaps, it cannot replace the need for physical proximity to essential services and the rich tapestry of social and cultural life that a large urban center provides. This makes it difficult to attract and retain skilled professionals and families in remote areas. The economic logic of distance is relentless. Businesses benefit from being close to their suppliers, customers, and a large labor pool, an effect known as agglomeration. This is why industries cluster together in major cities, creating a virtuous cycle of growth and opportunity that is difficult to replicate in a remote location. Establishing a new city in the interior would mean trying to create economic gravity from scratch, in defiance of the powerful pull of the established coastal hubs. Without a compelling and sustainable economic reason for being, such as a massive mineral discovery, a new inland city would struggle to attract the investment and population needed to become self-sustaining, remaining a costly, subsidized outpost on the fringe of the national economy. Beyond transport, the challenge of powering a modern society in the middle of a vast continent is another critical hurdle. Our lives are dependent on a reliable and affordable supply of electricity. In Australia, the energy grid is a sprawling network that primarily serves the populated coastal corridor. Extending this grid deep into the interior to service a new city would be an undertaking of immense cost and complexity. It would involve building thousands of kilometers of high-voltage transmission lines across difficult terrain, a project that would cost billions of dollars and take years to complete. The energy losses over such vast distances would also be significant, adding to the overall inefficiency and cost. While the interior is rich in potential for solar and wind power, turning this potential into a reliable power source for a city is not as simple as just installing panels and turbines. Renewable energy sources are intermittent. The sun doesn't shine at night and the wind doesn't always blow. To ensure a 24/7 power supply, a massive investment in energy storage would be essential, such as large-scale batteries or pumped hydro. While Australia is a world leader in rooftop solar, integrating large, isolated renewable grids into a stable system capable of powering an entire city remains a significant technical and financial challenge. The cost of pioneering such a system would inevitably be passed on to its few inhabitants. The provision of other essential services, from telecommunications to waste management, is also magnified in cost by distance and isolation. High-speed internet, something taken for granted in urban centers, requires extensive physical infrastructure in the form of fiber optic cables or a network of satellite connections. Similarly, managing waste and sewerage for a city in an arid environment presents unique and expensive engineering problems, where water for treatment is scarce and the surrounding ecosystem is fragile. Every piece of the complex machinery that allows a modern city to function becomes more difficult and more costly to build and operate when it is hundreds or thousands of kilometers from major supply chains and population centers. Ultimately, the decision of where to build and live comes down to a simple risk-reward calculation. The financial risks associated with establishing a new inland city are enormous, with no guarantee of economic viability. For individuals, the high cost of living, limited services, and professional and social isolation often outweigh the appeal of open space. The Australian government and private investors have consistently concluded that it is far more efficient and logical to invest in expanding infrastructure in the existing coastal cities, where the vast majority of the population already lives and works. The dream of populating the inland remains stranded between the harsh realities of the environment and the even harsher realities of economics. Despite the overwhelming environmental and economic barriers, the Australian interior is not entirely devoid of human activity. Pockets of intense industry exist. Mining. The continent's ancient geology has blessed it with some of the world's richest deposits of iron ore, coal, bauxite, gold, other valuable minerals. These resources are often in the most remote and inhospitable parts of the country. The immense profits to be made overcome distance and climate. They create isolated islands of industry in a vast sea of red earth. These operations are feats of modern engineering and logistics. Entire company towns are built from scratch in the desert. Self-contained power stations. Self-contained water treatment plants. Self-contained small airports. Massive infrastructure, heavy haul railways, massive infrastructure, dedicated port facilities. Transport corridors are vital economic arteries, not settlement engines. They are pipelines moving resources from point A to point B across emptiness. Life in these communities is a unique adaptation. Many workers operate on a fly-in, fly-out basis, flown in from coastal cities like Perth for multi-week swings, living in camp-style accommodation. They then fly back home for rostered time off. This model gives companies access to skilled labor without long-term social infrastructure. It's efficient but socially complex, temporary and extractive. These are industrial outposts, not organic settlements. The wealth generated is colossal and underpins national prosperity. It does not translate into broad regional population growth. The industry is increasingly automated, needing fewer people on the ground. When resources deplete, companies and populations often move on, sometimes leaving ghost towns. Mining explains people and technology in the 95%, but reinforces its emptiness. It offers a strong economic reason to be there, but usually for a specific, limited purpose. The story of human adaptation to the Australian interior is not just about large-scale industry. It is also a story of resilience and ingenuity on a more personal level. The key characters in this ongoing drama are a diverse group. They are the Indigenous communities who continue to live on their ancestral lands, blending millennia of traditional knowledge with modern technology to manage their country and build sustainable livelihoods. They are the pastoralists, families who have run vast cattle and sheep stations for generations, developing a deep, hard-won understanding of how to manage livestock in a landscape of boom and bust. Their survival depends on an intimate knowledge of the land, resourcefulness, and a profound sense of independence. These rural and remote residents are the modern masters of adaptation. They have learned to be self-sufficient, capable of repairing their own vehicles, generating their own power, and educating their children over the airwaves through the School of the Air. The Royal Flying Doctor Service provides a critical medical lifeline, using aircraft as flying clinics and ambulances to reach people hundreds of kilometers from the nearest hospital. These services are iconic Australian institutions, born from the necessity of overcoming distance. They represent a societal adaptation, a collective agreement that those living in the vast interior will not be completely abandoned, even if the cost of supporting them is high. It is a testament to a national identity tied to the idea of a fair go for all. The city planners and policymakers back on the coast are also key characters, though their role is often one of managing constraints rather than fostering expansion. Their focus is overwhelmingly on the challenges of the 5% where most people live, managing urban sprawl, upgrading congested infrastructure, and dealing with the rising cost of housing. For them, the 95% is less a space for settlement and more a zone of resource extraction and conservation. Government policies aimed at decentralization have been attempted over the years, but they have largely failed to create a significant or lasting shift in population away from the coast, defeated by the powerful economic and environmental forces that keep people tethered to the urban fringe. Ultimately, human adaptation in Australia has been about accepting, rather than conquering, the continent's fundamental character. Instead of trying to make the desert bloom on a grand scale, Australians have largely chosen to live where the environment is more forgiving. They have developed remarkable technologies and social systems to support a small, resilient population in the interior, primarily to extract its wealth or to continue ancient cultural traditions. This pattern of adaptation, hugging the coasts while creating specialized, technologically supported outposts in the interior, is the defining feature of the nation's human geography. It is a pragmatic and perhaps wise response to living on the driest inhabited continent on Earth. Australia stands at a critical crossroads, where its ancient geography and a rapidly changing climate present both profound risks and extraordinary opportunities. The most immediate risk is the intensification of the very conditions that have always limited settlement. Climate change threatens to make the harsh interior even more extreme, with projections of more frequent and severe heat waves, longer droughts, more intense bushfire seasons. Research suggests this could push the boundaries of habitability, not just in the remote outback but also in the settled agricultural lands, and even the northern fringes of the country. This growing climatic stress could force an even greater concentration of the population into the major southern cities, amplifying pressures on housing, water, and infrastructure in the very places where most Australians already live and work. The repercussions of inaction are severe. A future where large parts of the continent become practically uninhabitable is a future of internal climate migration, resource conflict, and immense economic disruption. The coastal cities, already grappling with urban sprawl and congestion, would face the immense challenge of absorbing more people while simultaneously defending against rising sea levels and more powerful coastal storms. The delicate balance that has allowed Australia to prosper on the edge of a hostile continent is under threat. The 95% mystery is not just a historical curiosity, it is a live issue that will define the nation's security and prosperity in the 21st century, forcing a national conversation about where and how people can live sustainably on this continent. Yet, within this daunting challenge lies a remarkable opportunity. The vast, sun-drenched emptiness of the interior is a world-class resource for renewable energy. The same relentless sun that makes the land inhospitable could power the nation and the world. By harnessing its solar potential and its wind potential, Australia could transform its greatest environmental challenge into its greatest economic asset, becoming a clean energy superpower. This transition is already underway, with the country boasting the highest uptake of rooftop solar globally. But the potential for utility-scale projects in the interior is almost limitless. These projects could power new, sustainable industries and create economic hubs in remote regions, offering a new reason for people to move inland. This vision requires careful planning and a commitment to equitable adaptation. The future of the 95% may not be one of sprawling new cities in the traditional sense, but perhaps a network of smaller, smarter, and more resilient communities, designed from the ground up to thrive in arid conditions. These settlements could be powered by renewable energy, supplied with water through advanced recycling and atmospheric generation technologies, and connected to the world via satellite. The lessons learned from 65,000 years of indigenous adaptation, combined with cutting-edge technology, could forge a new way of living in the arid lands. Australia's future will be determined by its ability to wisely manage its vast emptiness, turning a landscape of risk into a frontier of innovation and opportunity.